All right, we are ready for our last session of today. We've got building tomorrow's teams with AI-focused marketing roles. I'm so excited for this panel. I've got Levi Wartz, who's a senior AI marketing strategist at SUSE joining me, and Sarah Segal, who's the director of growth marketing operations at Open Sesame. Levi, Sarah, welcome. I'm so excited to jump into this.
So excited.
Okay, so this whole panel is going to be really focused on the future of marketing organizations. We're starting to hear a lot more about specific roles like yours, Levi, who are very much grounded in AI and are AI focused, or people hiring for AI specific roles, Sarah, which I know you're going through right now at Open Sesame. So to kick things off, I'd love to just chat with both of you about how these AI focused roles are reshaping your current marketing organization. What changes are you seeing today in your team structures and responsibilities? So to kick things off, Levi, I'd love to hear from you first.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we should really kind of break this down between maybe the different, types of organizations. I'm coming from an enterprise organization, so I can speak to that pretty closely. But I think, there's things to consider for mid-market and startups. And there'll be a lot of different approaches based on those different org setups and where they're at. So this may not apply for all, but I'd like to kind of touch on what I've heard, at least in the other two, right, which is startups and mid-market. What is kind of interesting about startups is the newer ones are becoming AI native. So they're really integrating, it's like top and bottom coming together and bringing AI throughout the entire organization, which is really unique. Just the timing's right, I guess, for them. And then conversely, right, like say the enterprise is very large, it's been around usually for a long time, lots of like defined processes, governance, all of this stuff that can very much push back against this idea of like integrating AI into an org, and like what are those roles, how do we use it, all those questions that come from it. So what I'm seeing is at the enterprise, at least, that there's a lot of pressure from boards,
Mhm.
the C-suite saying like use AI, implement it more. And I think what's kind of hard about this where we're at in this point in time is nobody really knows what that means, right? So what I've seen and heard a lot of people mention is that it kind of keeps getting cascaded down, right? And
Yeah.
people keep saying, use AI, do something with AI. And it ends up kind of hitting more of the bottom. And the bottom is the one that are executing and creating and piloting and figuring out these things, and then building that kind of back up to the top. So we're in that kind of strange place where it's driven from the bottom with interest from the top. And those are kind of colliding right now. So it's kind of interesting to see how roles are trying to kind of form right at the enterprise level. It's pretty entrenched, right?
Yep.
It's very structured that way that it kind of resists that. But it's the future, right? So with me specifically, it started because I ran a pilot, like right as Gen AI became more available. I ran a pilot based around that, which showed kind of action, right, and interest, and it was successful. Which that report just came out recently, like 95% of pilots failed, and
Yep.
three successful pilots. So I guess I'm doing something right. But those early kind of like actions allowed that space, right, for the at least my company to say, hey, this is really important. We need to build these at least one role in, and then I think there'll be in the future many more that find their way there. So it's an interesting place to be. I think in the mid market they probably have the most advantage because they have the capital, they have the like kind of the more of a positioning of brand. But they're not so entrenched. So they kind of have that ability of like they could rethink their org easier than say the enterprise and really compete heavily using that AI approach. So yeah, some things. But if you're a startup that's not AI native, you better really be rethinking how you're going to approach it, because unfortunately, I think there's massive competition coming your way. So yeah,
Totally.
on it.
I keep thinking about, you hit such a good point of is this something that every person in your team is starting to use? Like, I think, it's coming top down. You're hearing from boards and C-suite, like, you need to be using AI. And I, as a leader, I'm trying to think of the same things where I'm like, okay, am I encouraging every person on my team to start integrating AI into the role? Which I think the answer is obviously yes. But have you reached the point where, one, that's a whole new skill. Like, that is an incredibly, like, I try to lead from the front. I'm trying to build agents right now. And I'm like, man, this is like, it takes a lot of knowledge that is a lot of us don't have and haven't had time to learn if you're in a very like high growth role and you have a lot of responsibilities. So then I'm like, okay, when does that become a full-time role for someone versus me asking everyone on my team to learn a whole new skill and incorporate into their day-to-day? So Sarah, I'm curious to get your thoughts on org changes and how you're thinking about AI focused roles in general.
Yeah, this is it's actually really interesting. So a little bit about where I work. So Open Sesame, we are really focused in learning and development, professional development space, and skill building. And I feel like I'm not a marketer if I don't come to a webinar with some metrics or some numbers, right? But we've been super heavily involved in this because I look at it from a marketing lens, but this is really an entire organizational impact, right? We think about it the whole org. And some of the stats we've been pulling for our own org when we're thinking about how we're positioning, one of them is that, or two of them together, really interesting. And this is from between McKinsey report earlier this year and a World Economic Forum Future Jobs report, is that 90% of CEOs don't think that they have a workforce that's AI powered. And 40% of leaders know that there is a skills gap when it comes to AI adoption. And I feel like those go exactly, Levi, to what you said. Like I experienced for myself, we get a lot of pressure and a lot of excitement from our C-suite and our leadership of like, to use AI, let's maximize this. We have an enterprise chat GPT, let's use it. And then the real reality is, okay, but how? Right? Like, how, like, cool. Do you want me to just like chat GPT everything? Like, what do you mean? And I think that's where it's right now. It is, we're, considered mid-market. And I love what you said, Levi, about like, we do have a little bit of the sweet spot of we have some willingness and openness to try new things. We have some capital where we're able to invest in tech some, but there still has to be like, it's not just implementing a tool. It's not just adding on a role. Like this is impacting how is marketing and go to market overall evolving, and how do you do it in a way that you're not just like using AI for the sake of AI. And I think right now it's still really more of a conversation than actual action. I think there's more talk about it than action because people don't know where to start. And what we've really been doing, as we get in more about like the idea of this role that we're trying to create and just this gap we're trying to fill is, all right, let's cut out where we try to like use AI. Let's try new things. Like, let's just look at like, what are we doing today that we can either drive efficiency or drive effectiveness better, right? And that's where we can try to figure out where can AI come into play. Yes, in some of the current roles and identifying how we can upskill our team. But if there are certain areas, like what we're going to be trying to focus in on is a motion that is pretty repeatable and pretty standard of, okay, that's usually an area that is good for AI. And how can we pinpoint something that's already happening rather than trying to create net new in a way and evolve that to create a role or create a function?
Yep. Now, I want to kind of double click on that a little bit because I know before we did this session, you and I were chatting about you're starting a pilot program at Open Sesame about an AI focused role because of what you just talked about. Like you've reached the point where like we do think there are areas within the organization that are repeatable enough that we can start to use AI to scale them, but who's owning that function? So can you walk me through how Open Sesame came to this decision to pilot an AI focused role and what even is that role?
Yeah. So, let me Wayback Machine back in June, which feels like forever ago, right? I feel like that's how B2B tech is. June feels like ages ago. But back in June, so I'm work really closely with our sales team and our ops team, and we've had changes and going through a lot of different adjustments. But one thing we identified is that we use Qualify, our chat. That was one of the first areas we've used AI in part of our go-to-market functions, and just really from the chat on our website and a little bit of it. And what we identified with that, and we're looking through our entire go-to-market funnel, is like basically we have two funnels like most, right? We have inbound hand raisers and we have other people come in, MQLs and even like engaged accounts that both of them our SDR team is working today. And with working, like talking to sales and listening to sales and hearing that, like we know human touch points and the human experience is key and super valuable. And that's where like uniqueness comes in. But that uniqueness of how you have to adjust and change things is typically on the outbound side because inbound is pretty repeatable, super important, highly important. That's where the majority of our marketing revenue and pipeline comes from. But the process itself is fairly repeatable, right? Someone comes in, they need to be, qualified, and then they can go over to a rep. So that's what we identified of, all right, if there is a repeatable process that we already are going through, it takes time, it's taking effort. Are there ways that we can apply AI to that and still get the same or better results with less input, right? Less human hours. And those human hours can go to do more value driven efforts. So that's where it started of like, all right, how do we actually drive efficiency? How can we potentially scale this? And trying to do it from a test and learn model. So we're very much in the middle of it. And frankly, we're at a point where like this has evolved and changed. We had an idea a month ago of what this role would be. It was going to be an inbound automation SDR. That may still be the case. It may not be as we dig in more and identify, oh wow, maybe a phone call is super important for our inbound flow. Maybe it's not. Maybe we need to segment out our audience a little bit more. So we're very much in a test and learn still, an adjustment, but putting that role on paper and getting sales, marketing, our ops to align that we know we need to do something here has already been the biggest driver of like getting like us to be able to move forward and get some type of movement here.
Yeah. And I think something that's really interesting about that is both Levi, my next question is for you, and it's going to be sort of around your transition into your role. But you both have mentioned pilots. Like Levi, your role kind of started as a pilot program. And Sarah, you're talking about this role that you're hiring for being a pilot. And it's so interesting to me because a traditional marketing role, you don't hire on a pilot basis. Like you don't think about any other role on a pilot basis. You think like, okay, we're going to hire an ops person, or we're going to hire this person. And those roles are pretty set in stone with like slight variations. But now we're in this new world where we're like, okay, these are brand new roles that no one has ever hired before. We've never built them out before. So piloting them and testing them and learning does feel like the right thing to do. But that's really scary. So I'm curious, Levi, like you moved from a traditional marketing role, you piloted out an AI specific role. What prompted you to make that decision? I'm just curious to talk about like your journey from moving between those two roles, because that must have been pretty nerve wracking.
Yeah, I mean, fair question. I think I would note though, I don't know if I've ever been in a traditional secure marketing role.
What is a traditional role these days?
Because when I got to my degree, it was in professional writing. Everybody's like, "What are you going to do with that?" Right? Write it. I'm like, "Have you heard of the internet?" Um, and then I got into chatbots, right? And everybody's like, "What are you doing there?" There's nothing there. I'm like, "Oh, I don't know. I think it's kind of the future, right?" So every choice I've ever made in my career has always been, I see the potential and I get on it, right? So, um, and there's potential in there's like all these roles, obviously, and what I think we're in a really interesting time that you can take any traditional role and actually kind of flip it up on its head and think of like how can this be empowered by AI, and that's a really fun time to be there, but it also requires that kind of like interest in doing so, right? And I'm not saying everybody should or has to do that. And I think it's not fair to ask everybody to do that. We can talk about that later. But for me it's always been a little bit of kind of like intuition, like trying to read like where the market's going, right? Like what's happening. And then a touch of passion too. Like I don't want to say, because I think we've overdone that, like follow your passion, right? But you have to be kind of interested, at least, engaged and curious as to like what this could become. And that's mostly what's driven me. And so I think, the this is kind of what has driven my interest in evolving into this space. Certainly when we talked about that pilot, right, that had nothing to do with my current role. There's maybe a little crossover, but I just was really interested in it, saw an opportunity, jumped on it, said, hey, let's do this, let's pilot this thing, which at the time, which is kind of funny because it was over 3 years ago, but it was a hybrid search. It was AI answering questions, but producing search results. So you could drive right to like where it came, like where that particular question you asked would be in content or in a web page or something like that. And now, it's everywhere, right? Like Google's doing it, ChatGPT, right? These are common things now. So it was kind of funny that that pilot was hinting at the future of search. But yeah, it's always good, I think, to take risks. You cannot always be in the safe place. So if you're interested in AI, it starts with taking that first step.
Yeah. And I would say one of the things from a leadership standpoint that I've noticed with AI specific roles, because we have a few at Qualified, we have both inbound and outbound heavy focus, but they are like, this is all they do is manage AI, is it opened up a new opportunity internally for someone who was maybe in a traditional marketing path that they didn't want to continue to follow. So for us, we might have had SDRs that weren't necessarily interested in moving into the traditional next step is you're an AE. And then from an AE, you go into like your mid-market, then you go up to enterprise. And that is just that path that we've seen. But there were people that joined in an SDR role that were like, that's not really the path I see for myself now that I'm here. And I'm not really sure what the next steps are. And it is exciting, as we talk about this, like, is AI replacing roles? Is it adding roles? Whatever it is for us, we've seen it add roles and give opportunity to people who might not be looking for a traditional path. And they're like, I see an area of opportunity here. It's cutting edge. I think it's going to start to be imperative for every organization to have someone that is very AI focused. So it was exciting as a leader for me to see opportunity open up for those people that we might not have otherwise had. So I like hearing you say that you saw that area of opportunity, you jumped on it. I think for people listening to this, that's such good advice of like, hey, if you see that area of opportunity, there might be a new path you didn't know about before.
I'd even add to that, Sarah. Like, I love that example. About like what you've experienced, like that, what you just shared, Sarah, of not the traditional path. Like that's all. It was one of the considerations when we specifically, V1 of this is like SDR in the title, because hey, we have a great SDR team. Some have actually been here for a couple of years, and it's like, okay, how do we actually create potentially a new path that they're going to be passionate and excited about? On the flip side of that too, though, is if you are passionate, if you do have some type of excitement, I feel like some of us marketers, I feel like it's the level of passion in your job is higher in B2B marketing than probably a lot of like some other roles in there, but there's a lot of people like geek out over what we're doing. But if you are like, surface that to your leadership too, right? Because I think this is such an interesting, ambiguous area that there is interest from leadership to use it, but leaders are afraid to say, we don't know how, right? We don't know how we want you to use it. So like, if you're passionate in your role and like raise your hand, like you say, like, hey, this is something we could be doing. I have a couple of team members who are doing this, and it's getting a lot of visibility from our leadership because they are piping up to say, I'm going to do this. Nobody told me to do this, but I know there's some potential here. Maybe it's a fail, maybe not. But I think that's important for individual contributors and people as well. Like, don't wait until the role comes open, like create it.
Yeah. I'm curious because Sarah, you touched on this a little bit about leadership. They know they want this, but they're not always the ones to pipe up and say like, we don't know. Sarah, I'll start with you here. What organizational or cultural barriers do you think either that you've seen or you think marketing leaders are going to need to overcome to get these AI-centric roles adopted by the entire organization? Because it sounds like, leadership might be one of them, hesitancy around leadership, and they're uncertain whether they should be moving in this direction. So what barriers do you think we're going to see, or have you actually seen?
I'll really focus in on two that I've seen and I kind of expected a little bit, but these are like we're facing right now. The first is ambiguity. right? Like there is like when you are doing this, when you're both in creating new roles or trying to identify where the role should be, as well as, you also have to think of career paths for your existing team, growth paths for your existing team, like doing all of that. AI has just thrown this massive wrench into, well, what does that look like? What can that be? Because it is still a lot of unknown. Yeah, we talk agents and like there's tools and stuff, but like the actual, like at the end of the day, the business still wants revenue, right? Marketing still has to drive pipeline and brand impact. So like the outputs don't change. It's just how do we get there? So I think that type of like being comfortable as a leader with ambiguity, knowing that if you create a job description, if you outline a pilot, if whatever you do, like it is likely going to shift and change as you start taking action. But you
Yep.
can't not take action because of that. So I think that's really one that we've experienced of, the job description has changed a little bit. We're thinking differently about who needs to be involved. So like being comfortable with that level of ambiguity and navigating that. And I think the other one is, wow, and to Levi's point earlier, I think this very much depends on the size of your company and the industry that you're in. Like I know, like we have some financial organizations and government agencies that are very different in their AI journey than we are. But if you are in, mid market, SMB, like if you're really a startup or mid market or in an organization that is embracing AI, also being able to set expectations with executive leadership and leadership, like what can actually happen. Because I think there is this, the reality of what we're doing now and what is assumed and what articles they read and what they hear are often very different. And the idea of like the little stuff that I think, oh, AI can fix that, when it has a million workflows and you still need some coding and things. Like I think just being able to, as a, as a leader, as a team leader, someone who is trying to create this role, be part of that, like knowing how to set expectations and being close enough to the ground to be able to confidently tell leadership, actually, here is a path. No, this can't go that fast. And being able to have the examples of why that is.
Yeah. And Levi, you mentioned earlier at SUSE, you're an enterprise company, which is notoriously known for barriers and red tape. Did you run into any as you were moving to shift into this? You've always been on kind of like a cutting edge role, but as you moved into this AI specific role, did you hit any barriers from people or anything in your organization that you had to overcome?
Yeah, I mean, and SUSE is also a German company, right? So the governance is extreme, and certainly EMEA and AI is having a huge discussion, right? So it can be very difficult to navigate that as well. I will say a lot of our pilots run in North America first, right? We use North America to experiment with and bring these things, kind of test them, which gives us a little more flexibility. But with the intention of like, we want to go global with everything we do, and we have gone global with other things, right? But it just it's like a good crawl, walk, run type of approach. Maybe the run will come in many years later, but the crawl, walk, right? That's where we're at today, and that's fine. I think there's real value being generated immediately. And it really depends on where you focus it, obviously, for the value that you see generated. But I think, kind of continuing what Sarah was saying, I think there's a lot of uncertainty, right? Which leads to fear, which causes leaders to take a risk adverse approach. I think we saw this in the beginning with just when AI was first coming out, and leaders kind of pushed back and was like, I don't know about this stuff. I want to see more validation. And in that inaction, right, is a decision, and it will affect the organization. So, kind of staying on that thread, if you don't create these roles, if you're not enabling employees to evolve into these roles, I think the reality is they're going to leave, and they're going to seek the organizations that are prioritizing it. Yep. So if you fear it and you resist it, unfortunately, it's going to actually cause probably bigger problems, right? You're going to lose your talent, who are going to go seek the places that are less fearful and more interested in what can be created, what they can design with it. But the barriers have, it's kind of strange. I don't want to say it's like a barrier, but like, as I had mentioned in the beginning, the leadership kind of like cascading down this direction of like, figure out, go explore how to use AI in your day to day, in my opinion, is the wrong approach. And I've been hearing it everywhere.
Yeah.
Uh, lots of direction. I think there's some famous, emails that have gone out where everybody needs to use AI, from a CEO. And, and for me, it's like, I think their heart's in the right place, but I would caution against that approach because there's a lot of upskilling, right? It's a completely different technology than we're used to. It's not like you click check boxes and do sliders and some basic things and you get consistent outputs, right? People are using natural language and they're prompting, and there's so much that can change and move around with that type of approach, that they should be thinking, how can I enable my employees, right? How can I build good systems around this? And so I would just encourage leaders to not be so fast to just cast it down, to really, really dive deeper in. Like, what's the systematic approach to this? What architectures need to change? Like, how do I need to rethink my business to make sure that, and I think I heard this actually recently at a meetup. They called it the Hunger Games, of AI, right? It's like whoever makes it to the end, you win, and everybody else is cast aside. And I don't think that's the right approach, because you're really taking a lot of talent and pushing them away on something that they simply could have just been. They could have been upskilled. They could have been, everybody needs to learn different ways. We've known this for a long time. You need those different ways of approaching and engaging and developing those individuals. It's always been true. AI doesn't change anything here. So, we should not forget what we've learned from the past. It's still going to apply very much with this new technology.
Absolutely. Now, I think we have time for maybe like one more question. So, Sarah, I want to start with you, and then Levi, my guess is you'll have something you want to add on to it. But let's talk measurement. So, talking about new roles that like haven't really existed before. Again, when we think traditional marketing roles, we tend to know how we're going to measure success for those roles. Like, we know what we're going to expect from them. So as we're thinking about these new AI-centric roles, Sarah, specifically, you're talking about this inbound AI automation SDR. Are you measuring it any differently, or how are you thinking about measuring for this new role to know that that pilot is going to be successful?
Yeah, we put a lot of thought into that piece because there are so many different ways, right? I feel like it's like, and if you ask Chat GPT, which like, yeah, there's all these different fun ways that I can measure it differently. But I think at the end of the day, I really had to think about this and kind of try to sit, if I were in this role, and tell the people closest to the tools that will be used. It's at the end of the, like, the business impact isn't different. The
Yeah.
ultimate goals aren't different. And I think we can get in our heads a lot of, okay, we're doing something new, so we have to think of it differently. And I'm like, not quite. I'm like, how do we just apply this to what we're already doing? Like, that's really been my mantra of like, it's efficiency and effectiveness. How do we just apply AI to what we're doing already? So with this pilot, to get a little bit in the nitty gritty, like, we really looked at it from some of the same metrics we already look at our inbound from, and outline, hey, here's a baseline 6 weeks prior, and we'll, update that whenever we launch, and then the baseline 6 weeks after. And we looked at really like some of the core conversion rate. So 4-hour inbound to a meeting booked, that conversion rate and the time, meeting booked to meeting had with the sales rep that was qualified, so our SAL, that conversion rate at the time,
Yep.
and the meeting show rate. Because one of the concerns also is, hey, well, if this is all automated, what if it's just bringing in a lot more junk? So, like, let's look at our actual meeting show rate to make sure it's the right people. So, like, those are some of the biggest ones overall for the business level.
Mhm.
The other aspect is, if this is pulling time away from SDRs to be able to put it somewhere else, how much time is that? So, and that's a little bit more of like, we're trying to figure that piece out too. Like, if we were to define, how much time are you saying you're spending on inbound? What is that time savings that this is providing to be able to, like, both continue to execute this while now being able to put effort toward outbound instead?
Yep. Levi, I'm curious from your standpoint, when you moved into this role, was how you measured success vastly different, or what did that look like for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, it was kind of pilot, right? Like, it's like, completely unknown. It's very interesting to be in a strategist role, essentially for the entire CMO org, when it's changing so fast and
Yeah.
adjusting so much. Right. It's for me, I simplified it by saying, well, here's the art, like the structure that we should be looking at. Here's the three pillars, right, of our AI, that we should consider, and then simply kind of defining like, okay, so what do we do in these three pillars? And I'll share that, right? It's pretty straightforward. It's content, engagement, and data. So each one of those is somewhat self-explanatory, like content, obviously content generation, traditional I'm saying traditional generative AI. It's like 3 years old. We can say.
Yeah, it's traditional at this point. It's old school.
There's so many, solutions and ways to generate content now. So that one's pretty straightforward. Engagement, is very much embedded in Qualified, because Qualified bringing AI SDR technology to the forefront. We were literally just like, how do we engage, the massive amount of inbound that we have, that we don't have enough sellers to do so. And so the AI SDR was that huge stopgap measure, right? That we had a big gap. It's filled that role exceptionally. So that one's really easy to measure success. Content, a little bit harder, but I think it's pretty still pretty straightforward. Like speed to content generation. Can you scale your content to different personas and industries and stuff, where it may have been very difficult for a smaller team to do that in the past? Now you have these tools, right, to kind of create mass amounts of derivative content. It does come with its own problems, like managing all that content, which I don't think anybody thought of when they're like, hey, we can just create everything. It's like, yeah, but
now what?
Manage them, all those different versions. And yeah, so they come, new problems are created sometimes with solutions. But and then on the data side, I think that was probably the hardest and most obscure. But I think we're moving forward with some really cool solutions and seeing this like evolve in the market pretty rapidly. So each of them has their own kind of, niche success, that we're looking at, but some are very obvious. Some aren't so obvious. Like, for example, on data, like how do you ingest data and understand, what are causal factors in a campaign being successful, and then reduce the speed or the time it takes you to spin up a campaign from a month to a week, right? That's a huge success metric if you can do that. So some examples of ways we're kind of looking at it.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, Sarah, Levi, thank you so much for joining us at the Agentic Marketing Summit. It was so great to chat with you about this topic. I think leaders, it's very top of mind for them. So I really appreciate your time.